And the other cool thing with writing Guardians was the team that we were playing with, they weren't appearing in loads of other books. They barely appeared in their own books. So there was a bit of jeopardy about them because anything could happen to those characters. Nothing's generally going to happen to Spider-Man because he's got to appear. Wolverine, same again. But Rocket Raccoon, Groot, Starlord, anything could happen to those guys because who cares?
I'm Alan Cordrey with Vanbreed Studios, and today we're chatting with writer, artist, inker, lead singer, Andy Lanning. Hi, Andy. Thanks for taking some time with us today. Appreciate it.
Hi, Alan. Lovely to be here, mate.
So we're doing a series called Making Comics, and conveniently enough, you make comics. So that worked out really, really well. I'd like to kind of talk about how you actually got into making comics. How did you start? I know it was Marvel UK or Epic, depending on what flavor you want to talk to it. But if you go ahead and tell us your story.
Okay. I think if you ask most comic creators, you grow up reading and loving comic books, and as a kid drawing your own comic books. I would sit and just fill up these very cheap drawing books that I could, drawing pads with my own comic stuff. So I always wanted to draw comic books. I always wanted to be a comic book artist. I didn't know how to do that because growing up in the 70s and early 80s, there were no comic book shops in the UK. I used to get my comics from local newsagents, which had a spinner rack. But they didn't know month by month what comics were coming to that spinner rack. So I'd get into a story and then suddenly the next month that comic didn't appear. But like I say, I always wanted to draw comics. So I went to college and did a graphic design and illustration course, which was a bit of everything. It was learning life drawing, using markers, doing product design, doing magazine design. It was brilliant. It was a really brilliant foundational course. At the same time, that was a 4-year course. In my last year, I discovered, I think it was in Warrior magazine, which was famous for Marvel Man, Miracle Man, V for Vendetta. Those comics they appeared in Warrior. There was an article about the Society of Strip Illustrators in the UK, which met every month, and in London. And I was about an hour's train journey away from London. I would go in to the Society of Strip Illustrators every Thursday of the month and just haunt. I'd get there really early and just hang around, and that's where I met people like John Higgins, Arthur Ranson was another artist there, and eventually people like David Lloyd and Dave Gibbons, and a very young Neil Gaiman back in the day as well. And through hanging around there, I learned that there was sort of like a network of comic artists in the UK. Got to know about a magazine in the UK called Looking. It was a weekly magazine, and they did comic strips in there. Basically, long story short, my very first published comic book strip was Boy George's life story for this comic called Looking, because they did like Pop Stars TV stuff and a whole mixed bag of stuff. I then generated, I was doing Danger Mouse as well, which was a cartoon series over here, but also Roger Ramjet, which is another great US cartoon strip. So I was doing all these strips and working on a magazine because I'd done a graphic design course. I was doing layout and stuff on there. I then found out that Marvel UK had got the rights to do a comic book based on Ghostbusters, the real Ghostbusters it was called, which was a cartoon series based on the movie series. And because I'd done all of these, they call it drawing on model. So basically I could draw characters that look like the character models based on the cartoons. So I went along. Richard Starkins was an editor there. Richard, who's now gone off to do great success with Comicraft and his own publishing with Elephant Man. But Richard was an editor at that time. My sample pieces, I did 2 or 3 pages of continuity, but I made up a story in my head because I wanted it to actually tell a story. And I went back, took those in. Richard really loved them and said, look, this is great. He goes, I also want to know what the story is. He said, can you write the rest of that story? Which I then did, and it became my first published work for Marvel UK was my sample pieces turned into a story. And at that time, there was one of my mates I grew up with, a guy called John Carnell. We always got on really well together and had great sense of humour mucking around. So I started writing with John because the thing I found is I really like to bounce ideas off people. I like to collaborate. We came up with this idea called the Sleaze Brothers because we're both huge Blues Brothers fans, and obviously we'd grown up reading 2000 AD. So we, in our naivety, it was like, here's a great idea for a comic. You take the Blues Brothers, you take 2000 AD Mega City, and you smash them together, and you come up with a satirical comic. Which Richard was able to get Marvel UK, who were up until that point only doing reprints of Marvel stuff, to do some originated stories. Sleaze Brothers was one of them, which then, as you said, at Epic, we ended up being published by Epic because Archie Goodwin came over to the UK and basically went back with the Sleaze Brothers. I think he either felt really sorry for us or there was something in it that tickled him. Archie had a great sense of humour. I was so lucky to have met Archie, and for Archie, he just kind of took me under his wing in that respect, which then gave me a connection to Marvel in the US. So we were able to go over and visit the offices in Marvel US and be known in there rather than knocking on the door and nobody knowing who the hell you were or anything. It was like we were already being published by them, so they had to let us in. It would have been rude not to. so that's kind of, like I say, that's how it all really started for me, which I guess that was, it sounds like it was like a lot of being in the right place at the right time. It's one of those, and being able to take the opportunities when they popped up.
Well, that's great. Now, you mentioned Archie. Who else has been an influence on you and kind of guided you along the way? Because nobody just gets into comics and just knows how to write scripts, tell stories, do pacing, that kind of stuff. It's somebody has to show you. You have to kind of learn. So who kind of mentored you?
Well, I think I would say Archie was that major figure because I'd grown up loving creepy and eerie comics, and then realizing that Archie not only edited those but wrote a lot of them as well kind of blew my mind. I think in those early days as well, I got to give a big shout out to Richard Starkings himself, because Richard was, like I say, an editor at Marvel. He was also lettering, and he was also a massive sort of like historian of comics. He knew the process, where I was like a budding, very, very enthusiastic amateur. Richard really knew his stuff. So, but like I say, we were so disparate in the UK. It was like when there weren't comic shops or conventions or anything like that, it was like I learned a lot of my stuff reading fanzines and reading things like Warrior and UK independent comics like that, because they would have interviews with people like Alan Moore and Steve Moore and Steve Parkhouse and Dave Gibbons and people like that, and they would then publish scripts and stuff like that. So it was like I learned a lot of the craft, even how to lay a script out and that from reading those fanzines and that, and then getting to work with those people later along in my career was just absolutely fantastic. But I think direct sort of like mentoring was really, like I say, it was the people around me at the time, my peers. So we all helped each other. So these are people like Richard Stark, like Dan Abnett, John Tomlinson, who's another writer, UK writer, who was also editor of 2000 AD at one point, people like Steve White. And these were the group of people in Marvel UK who were editors and writers, people like Simon Thurman, another guy. We were a little team of people all working together, and we would obviously end up at the end of the day down the pub, which was like, but we would all be sharing and inspiring and helping each other. But I think to your point about a mentor, I think it was, well, on the writing side of things, I would say definitely Archie. And then later on in my career, it would be like Paul Neary, when he took over Marvel UK as editor-in-chief, really helped me sort of like dial in my skills as an inker, because Paul's obviously an absolutely fantastic inker. So we would have very, very long conversations about pen nibs and and ink and stuff that only inkers would really get excited about.
You and I first worked together as you were an inker. You weren't writing for us. You inked, of all people, Rick Leonardi on a World War II story. And if anybody knows Rick is meticulous on World War II, especially to the accuracy and everything else. So I would imagine that the inking on that would be a little bit challenging, I would say, just because of A, Rick's knowledge, and B, just his passion for it. So where he wants to be so accurate, detailed.
Yeah, and again, that's that thing of Rick had gone to the trouble of researching all of the aircraft in there and drawn it all. So my job there was to try to make it as clean and as representative as Rick's pencil, which was great fun. And again, Rick's another one who's absolutely fantastic penciler, and I've grown up loving his artwork and reading his stuff. To get to work with him on that was pure joy for me, really. Let's
kind of talk a little bit about your writing process a bit. Mm-hmm. How do you approach a script? Is there a difference between like working for somebody like Marvel, where you're going on an encore series, or maybe creator owned, or working for an independent? Can you just kind of speak to some of those things?
Sure. I think working for the big two, for Marvel and DC, as opposed to a independent, like working with yourself as well. The big one is with Marvel and DC, you always know that you're playing with someone else's toys. So that at any given time you've got to put the toys back in the box and hand them back. So you make the most of it while you've got the opportunity. But which is the brilliant thing there is you're getting to write the X-Men, you're getting to write Superman. It's like, that's wonderful. The slight downside that comes with that is that comes with a lot of continuity, a lot of ongoing continuity, because they're not only, your book is not necessarily the only book that they're appearing in that month. So you've got to fit in with everything else that's going on, and there's a lot. The higher up, the more profile the book you're writing on, the more expectation, the more eyes that are on it. So, and I'll give a great example of this, which was when we were writing Guardians of the Galaxy. No one was doing anything with the cosmic books at Marvel. This was like the wonderful thing that Andy Schmidt did with Annihilation, was pitching to do cosmic books again, and finally got it going. When we eventually got to be writing the Guardians of the Galaxy, we kept asking to use characters like the Inhumans, like the Shi'ar, like the Kree, ultimately like Thanos, and we were fully expecting people to say, no, you can't do that. No, there's plans for those characters. Everyone, because no one was doing it, they were going to say, great, yeah, go for it. And so we were like, oh my God, it was like, this never happens. We had a completely clear run at everything we wanted to do. And the other cool thing with writing Guardians was the team that we were playing with, they weren't appearing in loads of other books. They barely appeared in their own books. So there was a bit of jeopardy about them, because anything could happen to those characters. Nothing's generally going to happen to Spider-Man because he's got to appear. Wolverine, same again. But Rocket Raccoon, Groot, Starlord, anything could happen to those guys, because who cares? And what's really weird now is I think it's flipped. Is that you've got Rocket and Groot and Starlord in loads of other comics, so you probably can't have the latitude to do with them what we were doing. So that's like the mindset, I say, working with the big two. Then when you're working on independent comic stuff, the freedom there is you're not tied to all of that stuff. It's like you're laying the track yourself as you're exploring that, the story world afresh, because that's the whole point, isn't it? It's like and there's a great sort of creative liberty that comes with that, and a freedom to really throw things out there and and take the chances and tell the sorts of stories that you would never get to do with a Spider-Man, an Avengers, or a Justice League.
Actually, you wrote for us one we just recently came out with out of our Sword of Freya series. Everybody's not familiar with it. Freya is a woman whose father was a very violent, bloodthirsty king who pretty much traded her hand in marriage for immortality. He basically literally backstabbed, technically arrows, but we'll call it backstabbing, the wizard. And as the wizard was dying, he took the immortality off of the king and gave it to his daughter, and cursed her with having to consume human souls to stay alive, so she can't control it. So brought you and Ron in, because you guys tag team well together, to kind of tell a little story about how she tried to break this curse. When we started out with the plot, I kind of gave you those loose guidelines of, hey, here's the backstory, here's what she's doing, here's what she's trying to accomplish, and here's the gravity of it if she doesn't, because everywhere she goes, she just consumes human souls. She can't control it. And that's when we basically said, hey, we've got her sidekick who's named Loki, who's a immortal shapeshifter. And that's kind of the only guidance I really gave you, other than the fact that we were going to steal a golden axe from the warlord Thor and kind of turn you loose. So can you talk a little bit about how you came about with the story and the characters you put together? Because you put together a pretty good heist team.
Well, I think that was the key to the whole story, was the heist idea. Because if you remember rightly, and I was looking back in our email chain on this, we were going to do a lot darker story to begin with, weren't we? And it was, and I think you'd come back and said, there's enough darkness in the world at the moment. Let's tell something that's got a little bit more adventure, a little bit lighter tone to it. It's this notion of a heist, a mythological heist movie. So if you remember, we say, what if this was Freya's version of Ocean's 11? Yeah. What would you do? And I seem to remember saying to you at the time, there are certain things you've got to have in a heist movie. It's like you've got to have the impregnable fortress or bank vault. It's got to be surrounded by things that no one can ever break into, and then you've got to assemble a team of specialists who each has their role to play during the heist. And it was like, so as soon as we got that, it's like, oh, well, there you go. In my mind, it was like, this writes itself. And then, but you take that the mythological part of it, and this is the bit where it becomes fun, because you're not dealing with you're not locked into one mythology. You're the world you've created with Freya is, yes, it's Norse mythology, but it's Norse mythology in a world where all of those other mythologies are extant as well. So it was like, okay, let's look at Thor's stronghold, and let's create the elements that we need for them to overcome, and then let's look at characters from myth and legend, and look at their abilities, and assemble the team. So we actually did what Freya would have done at the time, which is we assembled a team of experts with their own unique powers to pull off the heist. And in fact, the only difficult thing was trying to fit it all into whatever, what was it, 30 pages. This could have been easily could have been a 4-issue miniseries, but then you have to be creative in the constraints, basically.
Yep, but I think it came out pretty well. I think it was fun, and I think it had a lot of elements of old heist movies, but also a little bit of Indiana Jones kind of those where you can almost hear the soundtrack kick up, kind of go. All in all, very, very pleased. Pretty much running up against time here. Real quick, is there a creator you haven't worked with yet that you'd like to work with? Either another writer or an artist or somebody you'd want to ink?
Oh wow, that's a good one. Like I say, on the art side, I've got to work with some fantastic pencilers in my day, and there's always new pencilers out there who inspire and excite me, who I'd always wanted to work with. Same with writing. If those opportunities arise, it'd be great fun to write with some people. I'm just trying to think of exactly who. I think it's all. I'm happiest when I'm collaborating with people. I'm even happier when particularly recently, been working with some new writers and some new artists, up and coming people who've been doing indie stuff and stuff like that, and that's great fun, because then it's almost like you're discovering and watching someone evolve as you're working with them. One particular British artist called Anna Reedman, who I've been working with, and she's fantastic, and she's just getting better and better. You can see her getting better with every page that she draws. We just worked with Bruno Adabas as well. Again, he's a new artist, and you can see him getting better. So that's really exciting. And then I think about it. Who wouldn't want to work on something with Frank Miller, for example? Like, who wouldn't want to do that? Or Mignola, or Barry Windsor Smith, or if you can throw all those out there, those would be pipe dreams. Then again, I did get to ink Dave Gibbons, so I am never say never, eh?
Exactly. All right. Well, Andy, I appreciate the time today. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I guess just thanks, and hopefully we'll get to work again soon on another project.
It'll be a pleasure. I look forward to it, mate. Thank you.